Students, when we study the history of English literature, we know that it begins from 14th century Geoffrey Chaucer. From 14th century onwards, till our times, till post-modern times, the whole history has been divided into different phases, and each phase or each part is given a special title by the historians of English literature. In today's lecture, we want to discuss one particular period which is known as Puritan Age. Today, we will discuss the how a new movement called Puritan Movement influenced the literature of this age. We will also discuss the major features of the literature written during this period, and also we will have a look at some of the major writers of the Puritan age. So now let's begin. See, when we study the period of Renaissance or the 16th century literature, when we study the Elizabethan literature of Christopher Marlowe, William Shakespeare, Sir Philip Sidney, Edmund Spenser, these literature written during the Elizabethan age was highly full of materialism, highly full of romanticism and individualism. But there were some people who are not happy, who are not satisfied with this kind of literature, this kind of attitude in life, and that's why there came a kind of reaction against this kind of literature, and that reaction was the reaction called the Puritan movement. Okay, so the beginning of Puritan movement you find towards the end of the 16th century. So roughly speaking, you can say the period from 1580s to 1660s, these 70-80 years, this period in literature, in English literature, is known as the Puritan age. It was a reaction against the Elizabethan age. Okay, now Renaissance, we know that the literature of Renaissance or the literature of Elizabethan age was full of materialism. People had almost lost faith from religion. Okay, so there were some people who wanted to remind the people, remind the society that religion plays an important role in our lives. Okay, so that's why a kind of religious movement came into existence, and that religious movement was known as Puritan movement. How it originated, as I told you, during the 16th century there was much disorder on political level and also on religious level. There was even much corruption found in Church of England during the 16th century. So the Puritans, those who believed those who believed in this movement, those were the followers of this movement, they believed that we have to strictly follow the words of the Bible. Okay, and they wanted to purify the church because there was much corruption, there were many problems with the authorities of church, and that's why they wanted to purify the church. They wanted to purify the whole concept of religion, and that's why this movement gained much importance, and it influenced all different branches of knowledge, including English literature. It actually happened during the period of Queen Elizabeth I and continued to grow even during the period of the King James I. Okay, so this is how a new movement came into existence. Now, who were the major writers of this period? There were so many writers and poets and dramatists, but we must remember the three names: John Milton, John Bunyan, and George Herbert. Okay, I have already uploaded a separate video on Milton's Puritanism. You can watch it later. You can find it out on my channel later on. Okay, so Milton is considered as one of the most important Puritan poets of the 17th century. Why? Because his epic poem, John Milton is the only epic poet of English literature known by Paradise Lost. In this work, Paradise Lost, which is an epic, a Mahakavya, okay, it is highly Puritan by nature. The poem tells the story of Adam and Eve and how they fell, how they disobeyed God, and then this poem is about the free will, it about the obeying or disobeying God, and then how the evil enters into the mind and heart of the human beings. So all in all, this poem Paradise Lost in epic is highly Puritan by nature. Milton's work, this work is actually a reflection of the Puritan belief in the importance of individual ethics and the need of self-discipline. Okay, so the Bible, what did Bible teach the people, teach the Christians? The same message has been presented by John Milton as a part of Puritan movement. Another second most important writer was John Bunyan. He wrote the Pilgrim's Progress, which is a prose literature, not poetry. Okay, and this is also an important work of art as far as Puritanism is concerned. It is an allegorical novel. You cannot call it a novel actually. It is a kind of novel. Actually, during 17th century, novel did not exist. Novel came into existence during the 18th century. You remember Pamela Samuel Richardson, right? So allegorical story written in prose language, you can say like this. Okay, allegory is what? Allegory is a story which has double meanings. Okay, one is the superficial meaning and another one is the hidden meaning. Here there is a character called Christian. Now Christian is who? Means everyone on this earth is a Christian. The character of Christian is actually the representative of the humans living on this earth. We are all the children of God. Okay, so all children of God are now presented as Christians by John Bunyan. So this is again a story in which the whole journey from the city of destruction to the celestial city has been presented in the case of Christian, right? So how we should achieve salvation, moksha, मोक्ष की प्राप्ति हमें कैसे करनी चाहिए, उसके बारे में बहुत सारी बातें यहाँ पर जॉन बनियन ने करी है. सो दैट्स वाई दिस इज़ अगेन अ हाईली religious story presented by John Bunyan in the Puritan style. Okay, so that is the second writer. The third writer, George Herbert. I have uploaded another video on George Herbert as a poet. You can watch that also. But Herbert is known by The Temple. The Temple is a collection of poems written by George Herbert. They are metaphysical poetry poems, okay, and in all his metaphysical poems he has presented the religious themes and spiritual devotion. The idea of spiritual devotion has been presented by George Herbert. So remember these three names: John Milton, John Bunyan, George Herbert. Apart from these names, you can also include John Donne also, right? John Donne has also written kind of Puritan poetry towards the end of his life. But these three important writers. Now the most important question that comes to us is, what are the major important characteristics of the period of English of Puritan age? Then there are 7 important characteristics. One is religious and moral concerns. I told you, that this kind of literature which was written, which was popular in the first half of the 17th century, was highly religious and highly moral. Okay, Milton's example I already gave you. Paradise Lost is an exploration of the Christian doctrine of the fall of man and how we should aim to achieve salvation. That idea has been presented by Milton in Paradise Lost. Another important feature of this Puritan literature is plain style. They believed in plain style. Now, this was a reaction against the Elizabethan literature. If you read the poetry of Edmund Spenser, if you read the works of Christopher Marlowe and other important writers of the period of Renaissance, then you find that their language is highly flowery kind of language, ornamental language. They use too many figures of speech, too many poetic devices in order to make the language more beautiful. But now the writers of the Puritan age believed in clarity, believed in simplicity of presentation. If you want one example, you should read Anne Bradstreet's poetry, which is highly plain, the plain style, and the focus is on everyday experiences and concerns. The third important feature of Puritan literature is allegory. I told you about John Bunyan. John Bunyan has written The Pilgrim's Progress. The whole story is allegorical. Okay, all the characters which are presented here in this story, they represent some one particular class of our society. Say, for example, the character Christian represents every human being like me and you. In the same manner, there is a character called wise man, there is a character called evil man. Okay, so wise man is who? Everyone who is wise in this world is a wise man. Okay, so all people, it's a story about all people living on this earth, and how why we have come on this earth, why we have taken birth on this earth, and what we have to do in order to achieve salvation according to Christian religion. That has been presented in an allegorical manner. Allegorical story means the story which has some hidden meanings. Okay, theological treatises were written during this period. Theological treatises means essays, big essays, thick essays, okay, bulky essays. And theological means highly philosophical or religious, right? So religious essays were very welcomed by the people during this Puritan age. One name you should remember, Richard Baxter. He wrote The Reformed Pastor. It is a treatise which tries to guide the ministers in the practice of their vocation. How the politicians should behave in public life, what are their responsibilities and all. These things have been presented in an ethical manner, theological manner. Political commentary, as I told you in the beginning, there was much disorder in politics also, and also in the field of religion. So religion and politics was the focus of these writers of the Puritan age, and this age was a time of much disorder in the field of politics, and that's why these things have been presented by the major writers of this period. If you read John Milton's works, then he has written some political tracts. Tracts means small essays, right? So Milton is also known as a writer of tracts. The tenure of kings and magistrates, this is very popular, in which he has presented how how the politicians should treat the people, how they can be the good administrators, right? This period, Puritan age, is also known for focus on spiritualism. Why? I told you, Paradise Lost, John Milton, John Bunyan, Pilgrim's Progress. So spiritualism was the major concern during this period. Even George Herbert, John Donne, and some metaphysical poets, they also wrote some spiritual poetry. Okay, they wanted to teach something to the society. They wanted to teach spiritualism, spiritual life to the society. Why? Because I told you in the beginning, this period is a reaction against Elizabethan age. Now, in Elizabethan age, there was much materialism. People believed in material pleasures, worldly pleasures. Okay, but the reality is we should focus on spiritual pleasure, inner pleasure that has been taught by the writers of this period. And the last important feature of this age is emphasis on education. These writers, even Milton, Bunyan, John Donne, George Herbert, and so many others, they were themselves highly educated, and they believed that education is very important for moral and religious development. Okay, so they believed that if you want to develop your country, you should focus on good education, ethical and moral and religious education of the people. John Milton has written this Areopagitica, which is a defense of freedom of the press, that agrees that access to knowledge and information is important. We must gather knowledge, information. This idea has been presented by Milton in this work of art. All in all, there are 7 important features of this Puritan age, 3 important writers of Puritan age. Okay, so let me conclude by saying that this was a time of great religious and political disorder, and the literature of this period was dominated by ethical concerns, moral concerns. Okay, and Milton, Bunyan, and Herbert, they were the most important writers of this Puritan age. So here we come to the end. Thank you for watching. Thank you very much.